see where it goes. And we usually go about 20, 25 minutes, something like that. And we just kind of have a dialogue, conversation. Um, I kind of sent you an idea of about, the church in the past going through persecution and maybe what can we learn from that today.
Yep.
It's kind of where I'm thinking that we'll go, and we go whatever. It's no set agenda so much. It's kind of easygoing.
Yeah.
And
sounds good.
We're starting to get a few people.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's see what time it is. Yeah, it's 2:01, so we need to flip this. And all right, here we go. Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to Let's Talk Impact. Thanks, for making this part of your weekly routine, hopefully, and you can tune in anytime. I'm really excited today that I get to spend a few minutes with someone very important to me, special to me, Alex Mayfield. Kind of grew up in our church, but more than that, he's my son-in-law. And so it's truly an honor to be able to spend a few minutes with him and just to talk about some things that we've kind of been throwing around, talking about a little bit. Hey, Alex, how are you doing?
Doing good. Doing really good. Yeah. Just up here in Massachusetts and staying at home, but life goes on. It's good.
Yeah. If I looked, I think you guys have been getting some snow the last couple days, and that kind
We have. They got a lot worse than us around the city. So down here, kind of we're a little south of Boston.
Right.
It was just a really big kind of sleet and ice, snow, rain storm. So a little nasty, but it's all right. Better than 2 feet of snow.
Right. Well, we've had our share too, and now I've had it, and I'm ready for spring. It's kind of what we've been talking about around here. Hey, I just kind of want to jump into a thought that I've had, and I really want to pick your brain about some things. I know the people who watch would love to hear your insight to it. One of the things that I hear a lot as a senior pastor, and especially in the culture that we have been kind of going through the last couple of months, and really probably a year or two, about the persecution that we see, that many people that feel that's coming toward the church. And I guess my thought is that, what we're experiencing today can't really compare to what the early church went through, what we've noticed throughout history, a lot of the persecution that the church has really had to endure and really overcome to really share the gospel throughout the world. And I would love to hear your insight and your thought about what you think about what the church is experiencing today. What lessons can we learn from what the church has gone through in the past? And I would just love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and just so everyone, I know some people, Impact Church know who I am. Other people don't.
Right.
Like I said, I mean, my first claim to fame is being Robbie Jones's son-in-law. But what I do and during the rest of my day, I'm finishing up a PhD in global Christian history. So hopefully I have something to say on this. But yeah, it's a good question. I think there is a perception of persecution in today's church, and in truth, there is a reality of it. Not necessarily, I think, in the U.S. in the way most people think, but around the world, persecution is very, very real in places
Right.
in the Middle East, in China, certain parts of sub-Saharan Africa. It's a real issue that many people today are dying for their faith in Jesus. So I always am. I understand when people feel very persecuted today within our current, maybe non-Christian secular context here in the U.S. But man, it's really hard when you kind of talk to people from around the world and you hear what people are going through, and to know that persecution is often far more violent, and
Right.
people die for the faith. Even someone who graduated in that program, several years before I did, has since, while I've been here, died for their faith, was killed, cut
Wow.
down while doing service in Africa. And so it's very real. And so I think we have to kind of approach it recognizing that persecution, there are different gradations of it for sure,
Right.
but the church's past has dealt with it in a really, they've dealt with very severe forms of it. And I think as I thought about this, there's really one word that I think kind of encapsulates it all the best. And it's really, it's like the Greek word martyria, which we get the word martyr.
Right.
But that word actually means witness or testimony or
Cool.
even explanation.
Yeah.
And what's hard about, persecution in the church is that the church has responded differently in different times. And
Yeah.
it's really a test of the church's witness, a test
Right.
of their trust in God's ability to kind of rule and reign over history. So in some places the church has withstood persecution, like in the early church. You had, we have these kind of famous stories that are a part of Christian heritage today. Saints that in the West we would talk about maybe,
Right.
and these people would be persecuted for their faith, killed. Right, Nero and all of these kind of images we get of emperors killing Christians. We even see it in Acts. And what ultimately happened is, in the West, Christianity kind of won the day in a way, you could say, right? That
Right.
the church survived this. And in a lot of ways, these witnesses were sometimes appealing, that they were an explanation of people's faith in the gospel and the power of the gospel. And the church grew in spite of it. And there's even I think, a famous quote from, I think it's Tertullian, I could be wrong, but it's the idea that the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. That basically, as people die, as people witness to the power of God and are willing to die for their faith, that the church will grow stronger for it.
And again, help, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but what I remember a little bit about church history was the fact that, in Rome, the early days of Christianity, called the Way, is that they saw so many Christians dying and really being martyred for their faith. Is that not the reason that Constantine and some of the others kind of shifted, because of they saw some of that? Is that
Yeah.
what happened?
Well, Constantine's conversion was a little bit complicated, because I think that question of why he did convert is an open one, but it's definitely clear that people did convert. Everyday people, when they
Right.
saw someone dying for their faith, or when they heard their proclamations, or saw their faith, or they read the literature about them, or the stories about them, right? That it was appealing, that people saw, wow, this is meaningful, and
Right.
people, did, I think, that witness that they provided, even though they were dying, was one that appealed to people. But I think it's also important to remember the flip side, which is that it didn't always appeal, and that it also didn't work. So I do global
Right.
Christian history, and while the story of martyrs in the West we can kind of celebrate and say, well, they witnessed the gospel and it was powerful, and you know the West was saved or something like that. You can talk about the Roman Empire becoming Christian, for better or for worse. But in Japan, a lot of people, there was actually a very early large Christian presence in Japan in the 16th century,
Wow.
very large. And what happened ultimately was, instead of getting the endorsement of the emperor decided to cut it down, and basically Christianity was systematically eradicated out of Japan, and
Yeah.
that the witness of the gospel that people provided, which was a good and true witness, ultimately resulted in, a Christian population being decimated. And while some Christians did survive, maybe in kind of a hidden form, today Japan's Christian population is in like the low, maybe 1% to 2%,
Right.
and it had a lasting impact. So we had to wonder sometimes. I think the challenge of church history and the challenge of persecution. We can try, to fight it. We can try to control history, or we can trust that God is the God of history.
Right.
That ultimately the proclamation and the witness that we provide now towards the Lordship of Jesus will one day win the day, right?
Right. Right. Help me and explain to our audience, what lessons do you think? Because sometimes when I hear and read some of the stories about the martyrs, and even today, the people that are, you've already mentioned about people dying for their faith and things like that. And here in America, sometimes I wonder if we even truly understand what I consider the persecution that many others in the world are facing. But help us understand what lessons can we take? What lessons can we learn from reflecting what others are going through, and then really, how we let our witness shine, and or we celebrate Christ in our lives
Yeah,
here in America.
yeah. It's a good question. I think, the biggest piece for me of history, of why we study it and why we should study it, church history especially, but any form of history, is perspective. We are really good at kind of sitting in our little bubble and seeing the world one single way, but when you take a second to try to get out of that perspective and see someone else's perspective, it can be a very powerful experience.
Right.
And I think with this question of persecution, I think there's a quote that comes to my mind. You know, when you lose privilege, it feels like persecution. Um,
Mm.
and but it's not. And when you look back in the church's past, you can see what real persecution looks like.
Right.
You can see what happens when, like, for example, in Islamic societies in the Middle Ages, that was a specific form of persecution. It wasn't necessarily the sort of violent one we imagine, but there was a sort of second-class citizenship for a lot of Christians. It's called dimitude.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but even that was distinct and different, and the Christian church's witness has sustained and kept going throughout time in majority Muslim world today.
Right.
um, and I think what we learn from that, or what I learn, is that it's very easy to feel like you're right all the time,
Mm.
and the moment you talk to someone different, or the moment you immerse yourself in a different narrative than the one you're used to, then you have to take a moment to pause and to challenge your own assumptions and to breathe, and then to
Right.
help God, ask God to maybe help you face whatever's happening in your life in the moment, right? And I think if more Christians would take a second to maybe learn about what's happening around the world, to read the stories of Christian martyrs, they might then begin to realize that what they're experiencing now is not the same exact thing. That they're still called to be a faithful witness to God, but that being
Right.
a faithful witness to God most likely, and most of the time in church history, look like suffering, not violently, working to turn back the Christian culture or something like that. It meant to silently, or not silently, but to proclaim and be truthful, and live out the gospel the best way you can, despite everything happening.
Right.
Not to try to like wrench history towards the end that you feel like it should be going towards. I think today we live in this sort of embattled Christian culture. Um, Almost, if you want to find a historical precedent, it might feel more like the medieval ages, when we feel like we have this society, this religious culture that's different than ours, and it's trying to invade our land. That's what I feel like a lot of people feel like.
Right.
um, but that's not really what's happening. It's
Yeah.
not really what's happening at all, and I think what's happening is that Christians in America are losing some of the leverages of power that perhaps we never should have been wielding in the first place. We
Wow.
can talk about the martyrs in the early Rome, and the victory, right, of the Roman Empire becoming Christian,
Right.
but we need to ask ourselves if that was a good thing. was it good that, I mean, it's good in
Right.
one way that Christianity has survived and thrived. It kind of spread throughout the West, but it also kind of spread sometimes at the point of a sword. That when you marry something like empire and Christianity
Well,
together,
isn't that what happened with Rome and
yeah,
the Roman Catholic Church? It became political, if I remember correctly, and so there was it was almost a marriage of it that maybe proved to be unhealthy. Is that is that something you're talking about?
yeah, I think even going back before, the Roman Catholic Church, before that was a
Yeah,
distinction, right? Because before, in the 300s, when Constantine kind of blessed the church and said that it's okay, and it became the kind of the quote unquote official empire religion of the empire. There was no Roman Church; it was just the
the
church in the
church.
West.
Yeah,
Um, and that sort of marriage between politics and religion is alive today still, right?
right,
The Roman Church for sure, but we talk about the Anglican Church today, or we talk about all kinds of these different churches. The tradition that we inherited from Constantine all the way back then in the West is one
right.
that we still inherit today, and that we have to disentangle ourselves from sometimes. I mean, that's
That's
also the
good.
challenge of history, that you read something in history and then you realize how it's still working on you, and maybe that's not something you should allow to work on you. So, in encountering the other person, you have to confront yourself, and that's what I love about history.
Yeah, that's really that's really good. I think one of the things I've heard recently is that Christianity is kind of growing throughout the world. That we're seeing, and we're kind of in America, we may not be seeing the spread of Christianity like we are seeing it spread throughout the world, where there seems to be greater persecution than what
Yeah.
we're experiencing. So, part of me is deeply saddened that people are suffering for their faith.
Hmm.
But yet the other part of me recognizes, man, God is winning. God is doing some really neat things in the day that you and I are living. That sometimes I think we as Americans, because we do live in a bubble, we don't recognize what's happening around the world.
Yeah. No, I think that's very true. I think so many of us live in that bubble. We don't look at what's happening around the world, and it really is a loss to us. Not just because we'd be better people if we did it, but because we don't get to celebrate and worship what God is
Yeah,
doing. There's a historian of Christian mission named Andrew Walls, and he kind of had this realization. He was working as a educator in Africa, in the maybe 1970s or so, and
right,
he realized, he was a scholar of the early church, and he realized, oh my goodness, I'm living in the early church. I'm living in this moment where Christianity is growing at an enormous rate. These groups are just popping up everywhere. It's it's
right,
it's spreading. Africa has become Christian at an amazing rate, to such a
right.
degree that today, if you kind of took all the Christians in the world and you threw them in a bag and you picked one Christian out, it'd probably be a young black woman from Africa.
Wow.
That's what your standard Christian looks like today,
Yeah,
not you and me. We are the old Christianity. And I think, again, the challenge is trusting that God is the God of history, that if 100 years from now most white people are not Christian, I have to say praise the Lord that God has some plan, and
yeah,
he's going to do something down the road that's going to bring this all together.
yeah.
And that's how it is.
And it puts us back in a position. I think, and I'm only speaking for myself and people, that we love to be in control of
Yeah.
this you know this scenario, this dialogue. We really would like to control the dialogue of it. And I think one of the things that I'm beginning to try to understand and grab a hold of, as one of the, using your words there, as one of the old Christians in sense, is that God's doing some amazing things, and I can celebrate that. And it doesn't look like I thought it would look, or it doesn't look like, what it did when I grew up, and watching my grandmother and my mom, and even in my own personal life, is that Christianity today may not resemble what I imagined that it would always look like.
Right.
But it's allowing me to recognize that God's doing a new thing. He's breathing on some, new people, nations. And so what happens in my heart and my spirit is I get to rejoice at that, is that I'm not in control of this. All I'm doing is, trying to fulfill, my assignment, what God's called me to do, and to celebrate what's happening around the world.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that question of control, that's really what it comes down to, and maybe what history can teach us again and again, is that we are not in control. And as I think we're coming from a charismatic Pentecostal background, right?
Right.
It's so funny to talk about, see Christians who talk about the leading of the Spirit, wanting to also somehow control what God is doing around the world. And I think if there's a lesson that we can learn, is that we are not in control, and that God is, and that story that God is telling in the world is far better than the one that we would tell if we could control it.
Right.
And I think bringing it back to the story, the question of persecution in North America today for Christians.
Yeah.
Let's say it is a form of persecution. I do think there are some biases at work against, people of maybe conservative Christian faith in our world today. I think that's real. But the question is, are we going to try to control our environment? Are we going to trust that God is in control, and then to take time and make sure that our witness, our martyrdom, whether it be a bloody martyrdom or just our martyr of speaking, the truth and being truthful in a loving community of Jesus, are we going to make sure that is right? Because I think sometimes we're fighting the wrong battle. We're fighting the battle for our culture when we should be fighting the battle for our soul and our witness. And that's what God is calling us to work towards and control.
Wow. That is so good. And I think that's a message that really does need to hit what I consider the American church, or the Western church. Because if that message gets out, then all of a sudden now we kind of fall back on our faces and begin to pray, and really, I feel, become dependent on God again, rather than in our own ideas and thoughts and opinions and that kind of thing. Well, Alex, man, this has been great. Talking with you, 20 minutes goes by way too fast. And I would really love to do this again. Have us conversation, because I know our people at Impact Church, and then our Facebook audience as well, is that people really, this is a message for me, I feel like needs to be heard, because I think a lot of people, from my perspective, is that a lot of people are confused today.
Yeah.
They don't, I mean, their ideas and their thoughts have kind of been blown up, and a lot of things that they were depending on in the past have really kind of been pulled out from under them. And I'm, for me, I'm saying that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think that's a thing that really brings us back to a place that we become totally dependent on God, rather than depending on our institutions and our structures and things like that. And I think, your message and what you shared today is so important, so helpful to the Western church, to the American church. And if we can ever really start, I call it just kind of, chipping away at some of the things that we have held on to for so long, and allow God to do, I think we can see the same kind of revival in America that all around the world, people are experiencing. And that's what I'm hoping for.
Yeah. Amen. Let's hope
Well,
so.
listen, thanks so much. If y'all don't know this, I can't. You don't follow me much, if you don't. But Alex is a new dad to Pasco, my second grandson. But my little buddy in Boston. That
Yep.
I tell him he's the only one that can tolerate my singing. And but give Pasco a hug for me. Tell Krista how much I love her. And Alex, I can't thank you enough for joining me today. It's really been eye-opening. It's been insightful, and I know our people have thoroughly enjoyed having you on here. And we're going to do it again real soon. All right.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
All right. Have a great day. Everybody else, thanks. Have a wonderful day, wonderful rest of your week, and we'll talk to you real soon. Talk to you soon, Alex.
Yeah. Bye.